Rick, it's great to finally get to meet in person and kind of get to chat. Well, I guess virtually in person. I know we've talked a lot over on LinkedIn and done a lot of different things. And I know that several people know you from your YouTube channel and your involvement in the Power BI community, and maybe even checking out your blog over at Gorilla BI. But for those people who don't, can you give us just a brief background of like who you are, how you got started in Power BI, and where it's kind of taken you?
Absolutely, absolutely, and thanks for having me here. Yeah, so actually, that's going to be quite a bit if we want to go all the way back on how it started, right? But let's first just say my name is Rick, and for those who don't know me, I'm the founder of BI Gorilla, and it's because a lot of my customers really have the same questions. So for me, that often meant that you would come in, do a project, and then the end of the project, everybody's always like, "Hey, can we just have a little bit of like a manual, or could you document a bit more so we know what to do when you're out of here?" And for me, that often meant just doing the same kind of documentation. So it all started at some point, like writing down things for a customer and then doing it again. And then I just felt like, hey, if we just make sure there's no privacy issues here, then we could just blog it somewhere and share the link with people. And that's really been the main driver, I guess, for founding the blog. So that's really how it started, and that was must have been around 2016, I like to say, 2016, 17. But before that, some may know I worked in accounting before, and I got started with Power BI because the company I worked at the time, they started to move to Power BI for their customers. For me, it was all new back then, so I think that could be an encouragement for some who are thinking about making the move. And that move really happened because some of the consultants who were going to implement that for our customers, we were just having a chat during lunch. And during lunch, they actually said like, "Hey, maybe this could be something for you, like for your department. You always like to automate stuff in Excel. So if you're somebody that loves doing like all the formula things in Excel, you're not too far away from Power BI, I guess." And yeah, I guess that's how I got started. Just trying to see how these Excel processes could fit in the Power Platform in some way, and that's often Power Query, Power Pivot, yeah, but in that area really.
Right.
And maybe that's also how you get into it, Clay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a similar story. I mean, because like you said, you were in accounting, and of course, I was a pharmacist before doing this, and it's just kind of one of those things you kind of get some experiences here and there, kind of getting your feet wet almost, and you really start developing a passion for it, and then just kind of you just run with it, and then it turns into a whole different career for you.
And there's some sort of magic around it, right? Because you're a bit in Excel first, and then there's a whole new platform where perhaps you need a new programming language, and you're not exactly sure if things are going to get easier, and some things might be more difficult in the beginning. So it takes a bit of perseverance to actually get started there.
Yeah, that's one of the big questions. People are like, "Well, how did you do that?" I was like, "You just got to put in the time," and that's a lot of it. Is like put in the time, do the work, and get excited about it, and find projects that you're interested in. That's what I tell a lot of people. Is like, find you a project or a data set that you think is interesting that you'd want to dive in anyway, and then go from there. And it's great.
Yeah, it's like it might take some more time in the beginning, but then after you put in the hours, at some point you're going to see where it makes the biggest difference. And the goal is, of course, never per se to say Excel should be out, because I think it has a good role as well. But it can definitely help with some of the transformations. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then that's what's the cool thing about the whole Power Platform is you've got all these different avenues that you can explore, different options and different tools, whether it's, integrating things like with Excel or Power BI or PowerPoint or pulling in Power Apps. There's all kinds of cool things that you can play with.
There's somebody I follow on LinkedIn, and I think his name is Wim. And the fun part is always like he always has his eyes out for people who are trying to bash Excel, because a lot of new products, they always start out with something like, "Are you still doing stuff in Excel? And shouldn't you be modernizing things?" And he's always spot on there that Excel actually should just coexist and has its function there. And I
Absolutely.
just think it's interesting that there's an assumption sometimes that we BI people shouldn't be doing the Excel part. So I sometimes also get the question like, "Hey, but you also never use Excel, right?" And I'm like, "No, no, no, I actually do use Excel a lot." So
Yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot of times that you can pull that into anything. Well, the next thing I wanted to kind of touch on, I know this is your first year as a Microsoft MVP, and congratulations on that. I know that's a huge award. Um,
Thank you very much.
that's really awesome. Can you talk about like the whole experience, like how you got nominated? Was there like an interview process? How it all happens? What happens now that you're an MVP? Do you get like the rolled out the red carpet? Do you get some like cool swag? How does this all work? Tell us about it.
Sure, sure. No, it's been very exciting because beginning this year I got the MVP award, and I just remember the at that moment that I actually got the message, I was doing some gardening, and outside I was just standing on the ladder, and I grabbed my phone to check something, and there I got the email, and it just really felt like it almost felt like I graduated from education or something. Like there was another milestone there, so I was super happy. But it had been a while really because to get nominated, you either need to have another MVP that nominates you, or you have somebody from Microsoft. They can spot your content or knows what you're doing, and they can nominate you as well. In my case, I'm like a good contact of mine who I catch up with a lot is Mark Proctor. He's from the blog Excel off the Grid, and he's in a Microsoft MVP for quite a few years, I believe. And we did been in touch quite a bit, and yeah, he actually offered to nominate me because he had been using my blog a lot, and he felt that it was quality content that was actually worth an MVP title. So what happens then? He can get you a nomination or any other MVP, and at that point you should share with Microsoft a bit on what you're doing. So some people they blog a lot. There's other people that do more like speaking events. I believe there's also people that provide free training or a YouTube channel. And the whole idea behind it is that you really want to help the community. So of course you could also be making paid content, but that shouldn't really be counting as something you do for the community, right? Because the paid content is actually something that you well have a commercial incentive for. So they're really looking for something like, hey, the MVP should be people that help the community and yeah, put things out for free, really. So I think those are the main important things for you to qualify. And well, you also get some perks as an MVP. So you get to be introduced to certain channels where they might already discuss features with you that are not available to the public. So there's an NDA for those kind of features, of course. But there's also certain events they invite you to. So there's lots of perks. And I'm not sure if I can show it. I still really haven't fixed it, but from that point on, you're going to be invited for a lot of different events. And really, there's only some of them that's going to be relevant for you. But if I just have a quick look here, all the yellow that you see from a distance, those are all like MVP events. And I know I should probably cancel out some of them, but they just keep inviting you for lots of things.
That's
And then
awesome.
you can just choose what's relevant for you. So if you're
Right.
very focused on the Power Platform, you can focus on that. If you're more Power Query focused, more Azure, it's really a whole bunch together that, yeah, that gets you included.
That's awesome. Well, now that we've kind of established your expertise and we know that, that you're this Power BI and Power Platform rock star, let's dive into just Power BI a little bit. And like my question, and everybody kind of has their niche and what they like to do in Power BI. So what's your favorite part about working with data in Power BI? Is there a favorite topic or like area that you like to create content for like your blog or YouTube channel?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. There's some favorite areas that I have, and if you look mostly on my platforms, you're gonna find that I focus a lot on the Power Query and the M queries. Now, the thing is, it's not like I work the most with Power Query. I do work a lot with it, and I can say that I have lots of fun solutions that would help people. But I also focus a lot on DAX in my work. So I like to also make like long DAX queries, for example, for financial statements. But what I've noticed is that it takes me a lot more work to make videos on DAX and explain filter context and row context. So some part of me is just a bit lazy sometimes, where I just really enjoy the Power Query part, and it's relatively easy for me to cook up examples and share it. So that's one thing. But I guess the other thing is also that I feel in the Power Query area, there are just not as many domain experts out there. So I know there's a few good platforms that give training, but I feel like the in-depth knowledge about Power Query is not as much available as is, for example, is in DAX. And for that reason, I've started to focus on that part a bit more, partly because I enjoy it, but also because I see that there is a need for it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's a lot of focus sometimes on DAX, and I think sometimes maybe I don't want to say too much, but I kind of do want to say too much because it seems like everybody thinks that, well, if I can just solve it in DAX, then I can fix the whole report. And sometimes there's either a better way or a different way that's maybe a little bit, not as complex to do. But sometimes people I think, want to fall on, if I can just learn the DAX, that's almost like a
Mhm.
crutch sometimes.
So how was that for you when you started then? Would you jump more on the Power Query train, or was DEX a big part of your first projects?
I think some of my first stuff actually was on the visualization side of it and making the report look nice. And because before I was a pharmacist, I had a background in marketing, so I have that kind of eye for design and being able to lay out things in a good way.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of got started with it and kind of built some of those things that way. And then as I was trying to build cooler things and make my visualizations and my reports look, neater, that's how I got
Mhm.
into building new things with DAX and exploring the Power Query, being able to create new measures and new calculated columns and all that kind of stuff, trying to learn how to improve the actual look of my report.
No, so on those topics, for me, I focus mostly on DAX and Power Query. I'd say that my visual skills are, I mean, they're okay. I still come at customers where I'm like, okay, I can do a little bit better than what the standard is. But still, I wouldn't say that that's my expertise. So I think we would have great synergy there if I
Yeah,
could do the data modeling, and let you do all the pretty stuff.
absolutely. That
I'm
sounded
sure you'd
great.
do better.
So kind of since we've kind of touched on a few different topics there with DAX and mQuery and Power Query and even the visualization side, what do you think is like the hardest concept for new users that have difficulty with, or they seem to kind of maybe shy away from it? Maybe it's a topic that you get maybe the most questions about on your blog or on your YouTube channel.
This is gonna be fun because I know a lot of these topics, and there is one that always comes back for the intermediate Power BI users. So I'm focusing a bit on DAX here, and it really gets all the concepts together. But one concept that's really powerful once you understand it is if you know how to combine iterators like a SumX, and if you know how to combine that with virtual tables, for example. Now, before we get to the virtual tables part, of course, the first part that you should understand is if you're starting with an iterator like SumX, it's important to know what happens with your filter context as well. Because before your SumX is performed, there might be all kinds of filters coming from your report, right? It could be from your rows, your columns, perhaps there's a slicer, there could be filters. And to get your head around what's happening before a calculation happens, it's actually quite tough. I also find it quite tough when somebody just starts out, like how can we easily explain this so that they follow what's happening underneath? And I think that touches on the part on the of the new function that's released about the logging in Power BI as well, because it's not so easy to troubleshoot what's happening when you're doing your DAX formulas. I feel, for example, if you're very handy and you can use DAX Studio, you can already visualize a little bit of what's happening if you're generating a table. But now let's sit in the seat of somebody who's, just a meteor or maybe a starter in Power BI. They don't always know how to prepare their tables in DAX Studio. So that's already a no-go for the beginning. But then to really imagine what happens when all these filters come in and how that gets into an iterator before your result gets calculated, I think that's where the most questions for me come from. Um, I think that's also something that once it clicks, it will never go away again, but it needs to click for a while. And I think one of the easy examples for people to understand how is perhaps if you have a data model that has a sales amount excluding VAT, and then you have a table that connects to, for example, your country. So there could be a country table, and you can have a fact table with your sales excluding VAT. Well, if you want to calculate the VAT, like the sales including VAT, it would really help if you could perform a sum X over your country table, where in your country table you also have a percentage of VAT for each country. So I usually try to start out on that level where I'm like, okay, for each country, we're going to filter our model and say like these are the sales we're belonging to it, and we're going to multiply that by the percentage of VAT. Usually it starts out like that. And then once you know that concept, you can start filtering on top of that with the calculate statement, for example. That's well, that's just one example, I guess.
So circling back to the whole Microsoft MVP concept, I know we kind of touched on this a little bit. I think that's something that I think a lot of people are interested in. I think there's a lot of people out there that are building content and doing YouTube channels and doing that kind of stuff that are doing things similar to what you have done. What advice would you give to those kind of people who want to pursue that as a goal to become a Microsoft MVP?
That's a good one. And I'm going to be a bit contradictory here right away, but I would advise them not to set that as a goal because for me, I've really done this because I enjoy helping people. So for me, when I make content, it's not really like, oh, I need to get content out because I want to be an MVP. And I'm saying this because you probably need a lot of content to bring it out, and it's gonna take quite some of your time. So you better enjoy it along the way, right? And if I sit down to make content with the intention of how can I best help somebody who doesn't understand this, or what are the kind of questions that people really need help with at the moment? I'm not sure if it's only psychological, but for me, it just feels like so much easier to make the content, and I get less worried about it, and it doesn't feel like, oh, I have to do something this week. And if you would skip a week, that's also fine. Whereas I think the people who really aim for just that MVP title, I wonder if they're still going to have the fun in it. And even if it would take 2 or 3 years to get there, I'm not saying it has to be, maybe it can be shorter, but even if it would take 2, 3 years, wouldn't it feel a bit like a pain at some point if you were always looking at like, am I MVP yet? Am I MVP yet? So,
Absolutely.
So I don't know. That's just something that I've always felt, whether it's in my job or whether it's like with making content. If I switch the focus to how can I help others, it just feels much better and easier to come up with ideas as well.
I think that's probably the greatest piece of advice you could give because it all comes back to motivation and what your motivation is. And it's like you said, it's a whole lot easier to just try to help people and build cool content because you enjoy it rather than trying to check something off a list or something like that. I think that's great. A great answer. So we're just about out of time. So I wanted just to say, I really appreciate the time that you've taken, to kind of talk and just kind of we can connect. And it's been great to connect with you and to get to know you better. And I know other people will want to do the same. So just kind of, if you don't mind, where can people connect with you? Just an opportunity to kind of talk about your blog or YouTube channel or LinkedIn or where can people find you?
So the easiest way to find me is to my blog. So you can go to gorilla.bi, and at the about page, you'll find an email in which you can reach me. But also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I have several people I connect with, and sometimes we get really interesting discussions. So even with like bigger number of connections, I sometimes just really like to, have a longer chat with people, see what they're up to. And sometimes it just makes, yeah, sometimes we even hop on a call if it's really something we connect with.
That sounds
So that
good.
would be the easiest, I think. And if there's any topics, for example, where you're like, hey, this could be interesting, or I don't see much in this area and I would maybe like to know more about it, also feel free to come up with some suggestions, and you can post it down on some of the videos, or you can just directly send it to me through my blog, for example.
That's great. Well, Rick, it's been great talking to you, and I really appreciate the time, man. It's been good.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. I feel flattered, and it was really fun getting to know a bit more about you too.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks so much.